There's a guitar pick in my case that isn't for playing anymore. It's just a cheap piece of celluloid, chipped on one corner, with two letters scratched into the face of it in unsteady ballpoint, SC. And I have carried it in the front pocket of every case I've owned for 11 years. First as a wound and then, for one very long night 4 years ago, as something closer to a promise. If you ask me what it's for, I'll tell you it's a spare. That's a lie I've gotten smooth at telling. The same way you get smooth at any lie you've told yourself so many times it stops feeling like one. By the time that night was over, half of Larkspur Valley had a new favorite story to tell at the diner counter, and it wasn't the one anybody had paid a caterer $4,000 to produce. It didn't end at the altar. It ended on a barn floor, at 11:40 at night, with the band I was standing in front of playing a song nobody had requested, and a bride in torn hem lace with her mascara halfway down her face, saying yes to a question that hadn't been part of anybody's plan. I'll get you there, but you should know first how a man ends up standing in the corner of other people's happiest days for a living, playing background music to love stories that were never going to be his. My name is Jonah Pierce. I'm 34, and I run Pierce Sound and Strings out of a converted garage 2 blocks off the Larkspur Town Square, which is a generous way of describing one man, a rented PA system, and a battered acoustic that's outlived 2 vans. For 11 years, I chased something bigger than this. 6 years on the road with a band called Coldwater Run that got exactly close enough to famous to break my heart properly when it didn't happen. Playing county fairs and half-empty clubs across a country I mostly remember through windshields. When the band folded, I came home to Larkspur with a broken transmission, $400, and the specific humility of a man who's watched his own dream evaporate in real time. I started playing weddings because it was work, and I kept playing them because I turned out to be good at something I never meant to be good at. Standing at the edge of a room while 2 people become the whole story. Playing the music that makes their first dance feel bigger than it is, and going home alone afterward to a house that never once got quieter. Because it started out that way. I've serenaded 300 first dances in this valley. I have never once been in one. That's the wound. Plainly, I got used to being the soundtrack instead of the scene. I told myself it suited me. The road taught me that wanting the big thing costs you everything, so I built a small good life out of other people's big nights, and called it contentment. And mostly believed it. Right up until the week Diane Calloway called my shop to book the music for her daughter's wedding. Sloane Calloway and I grew up 2 doors apart on Larkspur's East Ridge, in a town small enough that everybody's childhood overlaps everybody else's. Her family's owned the vineyard at the head of the valley for 4 generations, Calloway land, Calloway wine. A barn her great-grandfather raised that's hosted every wedding, funeral, and 4th of July potluck this town's had since before either of us was born. I taught her 3 chords on my dad's old guitar the summer we were both 15, sitting on a hay bale in that same barn, and by 16 we were the kind of inseparable that makes a small town start planning your wedding before you've had your first real kiss. We had that too, eventually, 17, under the same barn's East Eve, during a 4th of July that neither of us has ever, in 18 years, brought up out loud, though we both remember it exactly. Here's where I did the thing I've spent a decade regretting in installments. Coldwater Run got its first real offer the August after graduation. A van, a booking agent, a shot, and I took it, and I asked Sloane to wait. And she said she would. And I believed both of us meant it. 6 years is a long time to ask somebody to hold a door open. I called less. She called less. The last real conversation we had before it went quiet for good, she said, gentle and honest in the way she's always been honest, Jonah. I can't keep loving a version of you that only exists on postcards. And she wasn't wrong. And I didn't fight her on it, because some part of me already knew the postcard version was easier to be than the real one. I came home 4 years ago to a town that had kept spinning without me. Sloane was running half the vineyard's operations by then. Her father 2 years gone from a heart that gave out in the middle of harvest. Her mother Diane holding the books together with a grip that had gone from careful to desperate as the valley's competition, and the debt both grew. I found all this out slowly, the way you learn a town again after leaving it. A little from the diner, a little from the hardware store, and one uncomfortable amount of it from playing the vineyard's own wedding season, watching Sloane run a business from 30 feet away while I sang other couples' love songs from a folding stage. The first time I saw her again, properly, after 4 years away, was at the counter of the Larkspur Diner on a Tuesday morning, both of us reaching for the same creamer at the same second. Jonah Pierce. She said it like she was testing whether the name still worked in her mouth. I heard you were back. I didn't believe it till right now. In the flesh, slightly more sunburned than when I left. Coldwater Run, she said. I looked you up, once, years ago. Saw a video of a show in Tulsa. You looked happy. I was, some nights. Mostly I was tired and 3 states from anywhere I wanted to be. I turned my coffee cup a slow half circle on the counter. You look like you're running the whole valley these days. I'm running half of it and pretending about the other half. She said it light, but her eyes didn't match the lightness. Dad's gone 2 years now. Mom's trying. I do the books at midnight and pretend it's a hobby. I'm sorry, Sloane, about your dad. I should have come to the funeral. I was still touring, and by the time I heard, you don't owe me an explanation for where you were 6 years ago, she said, quick. Too quick, the kind of quick that means the opposite. We agreed. Postcards don't hold doors open. That was my line, if you remember. I remember every line you ever gave me. I've had a lot of empty highway to replay them on. She looked at me a long moment over her own coffee, something working behind her eyes that she didn't let all the way to the surface. Well, she said finally, standing gathering her things like the conversation had gotten 1 degree warmer than she'd planned for. The vineyard's got a wedding season starting up. If you're taking bookings again, we could use a musician who already knows every inch of that barn. I'd like that. Don't play it too warm, Pierce, she said, but she was almost smiling on her way out the door. Or the whole diner's going to start talking, and the whole diner, predictably, did by that afternoon. According to Gus's cousin who ran the register, half the regulars had us married off with 3 kids, which was, in fairness, only off by a decade. We were friends again by then. Careful friends. The kind who both know exactly how much weight the friendship is quietly not supposed to bear. She'd hire me for every Callaway event without ever once mentioning why she always requested the same 3 songs. And I'd play them without ever once asking, and that arrangement held for 2 whole years. Which tells you something about how good we'd both gotten at not asking for things. Then Preston Voss came up from the city with an investment firm's business card and a plan to save the vineyard, and 11 months later, Diane Callaway called my shop to book the music for her daughter's wedding, and I said yes, because saying no would have required an explanation I wasn't ready to give either one of us. I should tell you about Preston Voss the way the Valley saw him first. Because the Valley isn't wrong about much, and it wasn't wrong about the shine on him, even if it took a while to see under it. He came to Larkspur with talk of a hospitality fund, capital for legacy wineries, a plan to build a boutique tasting room and event pavilion that would triple the vineyard's revenue inside 3 years. He was 41, handsome in the specific way of men who've been told so their whole lives, and he moved through this valley like a man closing a deal, because that's exactly what he was doing. Diane Callaway, who had spent 4 years watching her husband's legacy bleed out slowly under bank letters, looked at Preston Voss and saw a rescue. I don't fault her for that. I want that clear before the rest of this gets ugly. A mother watching 100 years of family land slide toward auction will take the hand that reaches for her, and Preston reached fast, and reached for Sloane specifically, within a month of meeting her. He's kind to me, Sloane told me, the one time she brought it up unprompted. Sitting on a wine barrel outside the barn during a slow Tuesday setup, 6 months into the engagement. He listens. He's got a plan. My mother lights up every time he walks in a room, Jonah, and I haven't seen her light up like that since Dad. She picked at the barrel's stave, not looking at me. Is it so bad, building a life around something practical? I did the whole waiting for the postcard thing already. I know how that one ends. That's not what I asked. You didn't ask anything, she said. And she was right. Because I hadn't. Because asking cost something I'd trained myself out of paying. And I let the silence answer for me. And she took my silence exactly the way I'd earned. As permission. Do you love him? I finally managed. 3 weeks later, the closest I came to the question the whole engagement. I love what he's building, she said. Careful, like she'd rehearsed the sentence for exactly this ambush. I love that my mother sleeps at night now. Is that the same thing? Ask me again after the wedding, Jonah, when it's not so. Theoretical. Sloane, don't. Her voice had an edge I'd rarely heard from her. Don't do the thing where you almost say something and then don't. One more time. Either say it, or let me have my practical, listening, plan having fianc in peace. You don't get both. I didn't say it. I have relived that exact 30 seconds more times than any other 30 seconds of my life, running the different version where I actually finished the sentence, and I still don't fully know how it would have ended, because I chose instead to be safely, carefully quiet, one more time, in a decade full of them. The engagement moved fast. 6 months, a ring that made Larkspur's whole gossip network light up like a switchboard, and a wedding date set for the last Saturday in September, right at the edge of harvest, in the Callaway barn, because Diane insisted the whole valley should see the vineyard's future secured with their own eyes. I noticed things over those months that I filed away and didn't act on, because it wasn't my place and because a part of me, the honest part, the part I'm least proud of, knew exactly how it would look if the town's former golden boy started raising doubts about the man marrying the girl he used to love. Preston took calls outside every gathering, phone angled away, voice dropped low. He was vague, in a smooth, practiced way, about the fund's other investors when Sloane's uncle asked direct questions over dinner. And twice, driving back from late setups, I passed a rental sedan parked outside the Larkspur Inn, with a woman inside it who watched the vineyard road like she was counting cars. I told myself it wasn't mine to carry. I have thought about that decision every day since. The way you think about a warning sign you saw clearly and chose to read as nothing. 2 weeks before the wedding, Diane Callaway called me into the vineyard's tasting room herself, which she'd never once done in 2 years of bookings, and I knew before she said a word that it wasn't about the set list. Sit, Jonah. She poured 2 glasses of the estate's reserve without asking if I wanted one, which was Diane's way of saying she needed the ritual more than I needed the wine. I've known you since you were 9 years old, stealing my daughter's crayons. I'm going to be direct, because I don't have the years left to be anything else. All right, you look at my daughter the way her father used to look at me. I'm not blind, whatever this town thinks of me. She turned her glass by the stem, and for one unguarded second the fierce, brittle woman running a failing vineyard on will alone looked simply tired. I need you to understand something before this wedding happens, and I need you to hear it as a mother, not as an obstacle. This vineyard employs 11 families. 11? Jonah? If we lose it, it isn't just my legacy that goes. It's the Delgados, the Ferraros, 3 generations of people who've worked this land alongside mine. Preston is the only real offer I've had in 4 years of quiet drowning. I am not a villain for taking the hand that reached for us. I am a woman who ran out of other hands. I understand that, Diane. I do. Then you'll understand why I need you to step back. Quietly. With grace. Because I know you have it in you. Her voice didn't rise, but something in it went absolutely immovable. Sloane deserves security. Real, provable, bankable security. Not a musician's income and 18 years of almost. I loved her father with my whole reckless heart, and it nearly cost this family everything twice over during the lean years. I won't watch my daughter repeat that particular romance. Not when there's a safer door standing right in front of her. And if the safer door isn't actually safer, then I suppose we'll find that out, she said, standing. Done. The hard way. Like every Callaway before her. She looked at me a long moment at the tasting room door. I'm not asking you to stop loving her, Jonah. I've watched you do that quietly for 18 years and it's never once been my business. I'm asking you to keep doing it quietly for a few more weeks, until the ink's dry and the co-op debt's refinanced and this family's safe. Can you do that much for us? I said yes. I want that on the record too. I looked a frightened, cornered mother in the eye 2 weeks before her daughter's wedding, and I promised her my silence, because I understood exactly what she was protecting, and I didn't trust my own reasons enough to fight her on it. I have never fully forgiven myself for how easy that promise was to make. The wedding was, by every visible measure, beautiful late September light through the barn's high windows, string lights strung between the old beams by hands that had strung them for 3 generations of Callaway weddings, 200 guests in their good clothes, and me on the folding stage with a 4-piece band, playing the 3 songs Sloane always requested. Watching her walk down an aisle of mason jars and dahlias toward a man I had decided, against every instinct, not to warn her about. She looked at me exactly once during the ceremony. 1 second, maybe 2, over Preston's shoulder while the officiant spoke, and I have spent 4 years trying to name what was in that look, and the closest I've gotten is this. It was the look of someone checking, one last time, whether the door she'd left ajar for 18 years had finally, actually swung shut. I played the vows out. I played the first dance, not one of her 3 songs. A slow standard Preston had chosen without asking her, which I noticed and hated and said nothing about. Same as always. The reception rolled into its second hour, wine flowing, the whole valley dancing on Callaway ground, and I stood on that folding stage, doing my job, being the soundtrack, exactly as trained. Then a rental sedan pulled up outside the barn's open doors at 9:40, and a woman in a plain gray dress got out of it and walked straight through 200 guests toward the head table, with a manila envelope in her hand, and a face that had clearly practiced this exact walk the whole drive up from the city. "Marissa Voss," she said, loud enough that the band cut out mid-phrase without me even signaling it, loud enough that the whole barn heard it in 1 flat second. "I'm his wife, his actual, current, legally married wife, for 6 years. And I would like everyone in this room to look at the marriage certificate in this envelope before you toast to whatever's happening tonight." Preston was on his feet before she finished, his chair clattering backward. "Marissa, this isn't, you can't just, 6 years, Preston." She wasn't shouting. That was the worst part. Her voice stayed level, rehearsed. A woman who'd had a long drive to get the words exactly right. "Ohio. Then Vermont. Now here, apparently, wine country, my personal favorite of your little farewell tours. Same play every time. Find the family that's drowning, find the daughter who wants to save it, marry your way onto the deed before anyone thinks to check the county records in your actual home state. That's not. Diane, don't listen to this. She's unstable. She's been stalking me for. I have the marriage license," Marissa said, and set it flat on the head table in front of Diane Callaway, with a steadiness that silenced the whole barn faster than any shout could have. "Dated, notarized, never dissolved. Which means, Mrs. Callaway, whatever ceremony happened in this barn 2 hours ago, it wasn't a wedding. It was theater." Diane didn't speak. I watched her go the color of old paper, one hand flat on the table like she needed the wood to stay upright, and I watched, in real time, 4 years of desperate hope come apart across her face in under 10 seconds. Then it moved fast, and I'll spare you the full blur of it. It had Preston still protesting, weaker each time, as 2 more guests near the head table began comparing notes on the calls he'd taken outside every gathering. Phone angled away. It had 2 sheriff's deputies, called by someone's quick-thinking cousin, arriving before the cake was cut. It had Preston Voss led out through the barn's east doors in handcuffs, past 200 stunned guests in their good clothes, past a wedding cake with his initials on it, past a mother-in-law who had bet her family's whole legacy on him and lost it in 11 seconds flat. And it had Sloane Callaway, in her grandmother's altered lace, standing perfectly still in the middle of her own reception, with 200 people not looking at her on purpose, which is its own particular kind of cruelty, until she turned, walked straight out the barn's side door into the dark, and didn't come back. Diane went after Preston's paperwork, and the deputies, and the beginning of what would become a very long legal untangling. Nobody went after Sloane. I want you to sit with that a second, because I did. On that stage, with a guitar still hanging off my shoulder, and 200 guests murmuring into their wine, like the reception was a play that had gotten a shocking new ending nobody could look away from. Her mother was consumed. Her friends were frozen, unsure what a person even says. And I stood there running my own decade of not asking through my head one more time, watching the door she'd walk through, and I thought about Dale Mercer's rule secondhand. A lock fails by giving up too easy or never giving at all. Except this time it wasn't a lock. It was a barn door, and it was still swinging. I set the guitar down. First time in 11 years I've left an instrument mid-set without a word to the band. I found her around the side of the barn, sitting on the old stone wall her great-grandfather built. Torn hem gathered in her lap, mascara tracked halfway down her face, crying the kind of cry that isn't pretty and isn't performed and doesn't care who's watching. Because at last, all night, nobody was. She heard me coming and didn't look up. "Please don't," she said. "Thick, whatever kind thing you're about to say. I can't. Not tonight. Not from you especially." "Why not especially from me?" "Because you'll be gentle about it," she said. "And gentle is what's going to break me the rest of the way. Everyone else in there is too stunned to be gentle. You've had 4 years of practice at it." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, furious at herself. "I married a man who was already married, Jonah, in front of the whole valley. In my family's barn. My mother mortgaged this vineyard's last good year on a con artist because I let her. Because I was tired. Because it was easier than admitting the postcard version of my life never really left. It just came home wearing a nicer suit." Her voice cracked clean in half. "I don't need gentle. I need somebody to tell me the truth. Which is that I am now the biggest story this town has had in a decade. And I will be that story at the market, at church, at my own mother's table, for years." I sat down on the wall beside her, not close, giving her the room she'd have taken anyway. "You're right that you're the biggest story this town's had in a decade," I said. "You don't get to decide what kind, though. Not by yourself. Not tonight. I don't have the energy to fight you on philosophy, Jonah. I'm not doing philosophy. I'm doing math. Same as I always do." I nodded back toward the barn, where the band stood frozen on stage and 200 guests were deciding, in real time, what story they were going to tell about tonight for the next 20 years. Right now, in there, they're writing the ending. The scandal ending. The poor Sloane ending. And once a town picks an ending, Sloane, it tends to stick. I know that better than almost anybody. I spent 6 years being the one who left before I ever got a chance to be anything else. This isn't the same, Jonah. You left. I got left standing in humiliation in my own family's barn with sheriff's deputies at my own reception. Those aren't the same kind of story. You're right, they're not. Yours is worse, and you didn't earn a single second of it. I sat back down beside her instead of staying above her. But here's the part I keep turning over. Right now, in there, Preston's the only one still writing anything. His con, his arrest, his ending. You walking out that side door is the last scene in his story, Sloane, not the first scene in yours. You don't have to go back in there for me. You don't even have to go back in there for your mother. But if you let his ending be the whole night, he wins something he doesn't deserve to keep. The last word. She wiped her face again, quieter now, listening despite herself. And what's the first scene in mine supposed to look like? I don't exactly have a script for my legal husband got arrested at the reception. Neither do I. I've got one idea, and it's small, and it's entirely yours to say no to. I stood and held out my hand, steady, no speech in it yet, just an offer. She looked at my hand a long moment, like it was a door she wasn't sure had a floor on the other side of it. Jonah, I just found out my marriage never existed. I have mascara down to my collarbone and a mother in there, having the worst night of her life. And you want to walk me back into a room full of people staring at me. I want to walk you back into a room full of people who are about to get a much better story than the one they think they're getting, I said. But that part's up to you. I'm not going to pretend I've got a plan bigger than one dance and a promise. Because I don't. I've had one plan for 18 years and I kept postponing it. Because postponing felt safer than finding out you'd say no. I'm done postponing it, Sloan. Tonight, of all nights, felt like the wrong night to keep being careful. So here it is, whether it's the right night or not. Here what is. I'm not asking you to fall in love with me in the parking lot of your own wedding disaster. I'm asking for one dance, right now, in front of every single person in that barn, so that whatever story they carry out of here tonight, it isn't poor Sloane Calloway, humiliated in her own family's barn. It's something else. Something true. That you're the strongest woman this valley's ever produced. And you didn't sit in the dark and let a con man's ending be the last word on your night. I kept my hand out. Dance with me. Let's give them something to talk about. The words hung there in the cool September air, plain, not performed, exactly the kind of asking I'd spent a decade refusing to do out loud. Something moved across her whole face. Grief and fury and something else under both of them, old and stubborn and finally awake. And she laughed, one broken, disbelieving note, and put her hand in mine. "You're insane," she said. "This is insane. I have mascara everywhere, and half the guest list currently thinks I'm the saddest woman in California. I've seen worse at a Calloway wedding. Give me 4 minutes, and I promise you a very different rumor by dessert." We walked back through the barn's side door together, and I want you to picture it, because I've relived it more times than I can count. 200 faces turning as one. The murmuring dying mid-sentence, Diane Calloway looking up from a table full of Preston's scattered fraudulent paperwork with an expression I couldn't read yet. And me walking straight past the frozen band to the small folding stage, picking my guitar back up and saying into the microphone, plain and unhurried, "Sorry, folks. We're going to finish this reception properly. Sloane, if the room will have us." I played it myself. Not a wedding standard, not the song Preston had chosen for a first dance that was never legally a first dance to begin with. I played the third of her 3 songs, the one she always requested and never explained, the one from a hay bale in this exact barn when we were 15, and I sang it looking straight at her while she stood alone in the middle of that floor in torn lace and dried tears. And then I set the guitar in a stand, walked down off that stage, and finished the song as a dance instead of a performance, her hand in mine, in front of every person who thought they already knew how tonight's story ended. Nobody in that barn breathed for the first 30 seconds. Then, slow, like something thawing, Larkspur Valley did what Larkspur Valley has always done best. It decided, as one body, to be kind. Her cousin Priya was the first one onto the floor, dragging her own husband by the wrist. Then, Diane Calloway herself, of all people, stood up from that table of fraudulent paperwork, walked to the center of the barn, and simply put her hand on Sloane's shoulder for a moment. Not a word, just contact. Mother to daughter. The whole night's grief passing between them in a touch, before stepping back to let us finish. By the second verse, half the reception was on the floor. Not because a DJ told them to be, but because 200 people who just watched a scandal decided, together, without discussing it, to write the better ending instead. That's the story this valley tells now, if you ask at the diner. Not the con man. Not the handcuffs, though those come up. The story is the dance. The story is Jonah Pierce setting his guitar down mid-set, a thing he had never once done in 11 years of playing, and asking Sloane Calloway to dance in front of the whole valley on the worst night of her life, and meaning it enough that it turned the worst night of her life into the one everybody still talks about for the right reasons. The marriage was voided within the week, never valid to begin with, the courts confirmed, which spared Sloane the added cruelty of a divorce on top of everything else. Preston Voss is doing time in 3 counties for fraud running the same play on 2 other families before Larkspur. Marissa Voss, it turns out, was tracking him for a year and has since become, unexpectedly, something like Sloane's friend. The 2 of them united by the specific fury only his victims understand. She came by the shop that winter, unannounced, to thank me. Of all things. "I've hunted that man through 4 states, she said, leaning in my doorway like she wasn't sure she was welcome. I walked into that barn ready for a scene. I didn't expect to end up watching the nicest thing I've seen in years happen 30 feet from the wreckage I caused. You didn't cause it. He did. Try telling that to a room full of strangers whose wedding I just detonated. She managed something close to a smile. Sloane invited me to Thanksgiving. Did she tell you that? Sworn enemies by circumstance. Having pie together in 3 weeks. I don't fully understand this town. Nobody does. We just keep living in it anyway. Diane Calloway sold the tasting room plans, every trace of Preston's fake capital, and instead did the harder, slower, truer thing. Refinanced through the Valley's own agricultural co-op, at real rates, with a real plan. And put Sloane's name on the deed alongside her own. The first woman's name on that paper in 4 generations of Calloway men, holding it alone. I nearly lost everything chasing a shortcut, she told me once. Months later, watching Sloane run a harvest crew from the front steps. I should have just trusted the girl who was already saving it. And I should never have asked you to be quiet, Jonah. I was so busy protecting 11 families, I nearly cost my daughter the one thing on this land that was never actually for sale. She reached over and squeezed my hand, brief, fierce, very Diane about it. Don't let me talk you into silence again. I mean that. I won't. Good. Because I already picked out a song for the wedding, and it isn't one of Preston's. Sloane and I took it slow, which I want to say plainly, because slow was the whole point. No barn floor engagement, no rushed anything. We dated properly, at last, the ordinary way. Dinners, arguments about nothing, a year of learning each other as the adults we'd actually become, instead of the teenagers we used to be. I finally told her about the guitar pick, the one with her initials scratched in ballpoint that I'd carried in every case for 11 years. And she cried again, the good kind this time, and told me she'd found the matching one in an old cigar box the week her father died and never once been able to throw it away either. 11 years, she said, turning it over in her fingers on my kitchen table one night that winter. You carried this through 6 years of touring, through Tulsa, through every version of you that wasn't me yet. I told myself it was a spare pick, practical, nothing sentimental about it. Jonah Pierce, you have never once in your life been practical about anything that mattered. She set it down, gentle, between us. I kept mine in a cigar box in my sock drawer and told myself the same lie. We're a matched set of liars, you and I. We could stop. Being liars, I mean. It's on the table now. It's been on the table since I was 15 years old on a hay bale, she said. You were just too slow a reader. We were married last June, in the same barn, under the same beams her great-grandfather raised. No investment fund, no shortcuts. Just 200 people who remembered exactly which dance started it, and Diane Calloway crying happy tears in the front row for once, and Marissa Voss, of all people, seated at table 6 with a card that read Friend of the Bride, because some endings are stranger and better than anything a story would dare invent on its own. We danced our first real dance to that same third song. And when it ended, with the whole valley watching, I leaned down and said the only line that's ever mattered between us, the one I'd been circling for 18 years before I finally had the nerve to spend it whole. Dance with me, I said again, soft. Just for her this time. Let's give them something to talk about. For the rest of our lives. This time, if you'll have me. I already did, she said, laughing and crying both, the way she does everything worth doing. 4 years ago, on the worst night either of us ever had, you were just too slow to notice you'd already gotten your answer. She was right. She usually is. I keep that guitar pick in my case to this day. Not a spare anymore. Never was. Just proof that some promises are worth carrying quietly for a decade if it means you're finally brave enough to play them out loud when it counts.